Welcome back to In Ohio Country Today, and joining me now is Eric Conn. We're at the Ohio Agribusiness Association Annual Conference, and Eric, from a legal standpoint, you have a lot to offer our visitors here today for the Ohio Agribusiness Association. Why don't we talk a little bit about what you do?
So my name is Eric Conn. I'm one of the founding partners and the chair of the National OSHA Practice Group at Conn, Maciel, Carey. I've been working with employers exclusively in the field of workplace safety and health law for over 20 years now, and in particular with a really heavy focus on the grain industry and agriculture in particular. When I launched my practice, my own practice, about a decade ago, it was around the time that OSHA was really paying a lot of attention to the grain industry. So it was a natural fit for me. So I was paying a lot of attention to the grain industry as well, and started working closely with the National Grain and Feed Association, state affiliates like OABA, and others around the country in the major grain states, and helping them develop compliance strategies and helping manage their interactions with OSHA when OSHA came on site to conduct enforcement inspections. I started my practice and practiced for a little more than a decade alongside the first general counsel of the OSHA Review Commission, and again have practiced exclusively in this field for about 22 years. And 8 years ago, launched Conn, Maciel, Carey as a specialty OSHA law firm.
Well, let's talk about some of those strategies that you're working with these agribusinesses about.
Well, one in particular, the subject of our discussion today is about working inside of grain bins with energized sweep augers. That is a significant topic, an important practice that those in the grain industry, grain handling, have to do, but one that has had something of a tortured history with OSHA on the enforcement front. And this goes back to around that period, 2008, 9, and 10. There was a period of time where there was a rash of engulfment incidents. Employees were inside of grain bins and getting trapped and engulfed and drowning inside of grain bins. And that was happening at the time because of a particularly bad series of wet harvests where grain was clumping together and causing employees to have to go in and work extra hard to get the grain to flow out of bins, and it created a hazardous condition. And that is when OSHA really started paying attention to that issue, obviously because there were so many incidents occurring, and that was the birth of the grain local and regional emphasis programs by OSHA, and the birth of some of these significant enforcement practices by OSHA focusing on work with sweep augers and really any kind of activities inside of grain bins. So I worked with National Grain and Feed Association and with OSHA itself to develop guidance, interpretations, and to help develop a practice where employers could execute the task that needed to be executed, getting inside of bins to empty the bins, but do it in a way that satisfied the OSHA regulatory framework and did it safely in a time where there was a spike in doing it in an unsafe way.
So working basically as a liaison between the two, making sure that everybody's crossing the T's and dotting the I's. What is it like working with OSHA at that standpoint? Or at any standpoint, today, for example, when it comes to the enforcement action or what they're trying to do to enforce, when you say that, what are we talking about enforcement-wise?
Yeah, I mean, you see sort of the roller coaster of enforcement at any executive agency, but OSHA, that's my bailiwick. That's what I watch, sort of administration after administration. You see the pendulum swing. We are in a Democratic administration. We are at a time where OSHA has some new enforcement authority, and they're taking great advantage of it. We have now, the head of OSHA used to be the head of Cal OSHA. The deputy labor secretary, this is at the federal level, used to be the labor secretary in California. So we're seeing a little bit of the Californication of labor, the Department of Labor, and enforcement at the federal OSHA level. And we are seeing records set. Fiscal year 2022 was a record by OSHA of the most $100,000 plus enforcement actions. And we've seen just in the last 3 months a couple of major announcements by OSHA about new enforcement authority, new enforcement policies. One of those is a big expansion of a program called the Severe Violator Enforcement Program. I think you can tell by the title, this is not something employers want to get mixed up in, but OSHA made some changes to this program in a way that looks like will about triple the number of employers that get tripped up into this program. And the grain industry has long been a favorite for OSHA at the intersection of this program. Grain hazards have been what OSHA has characterized as high emphasis hazards for purposes of the Severe Violator Enforcement Program. And because of the grain emphasis programs in all of the major grain states in the country, including in the region that covers Ohio, OSHA is getting into grain facilities and mills much more often than they would otherwise, which means they're uniquely susceptible to these kinds of programs. A couple of the other big changes, OSHA has literally increased the maximum authority it has to fine employers. They've been doing this every year since 2016, but they're doing it in connection with the increase in inflation year over year. And we know that in 2021 and 2022 were two of the biggest years from an inflation standpoint in the last few decades. Mm-hmm. So as a result of that, OSHA's penalty authority has increased by about 15% between 2021, 2022, and now the start of 2023. So OSHA fines are naturally getting bigger because of that. And then the last big thing that they announced just last week is a change in the circumstances where OSHA can fine what they call instance-by-instance violations. So it used to be OSHA could issue a citation for not ensuring employees wore hard hats, and there was one violation, one penalty associated with that. Well, now they've expanded the circumstances where they can fine you instance by instance per employee. So instead of one hard hat violation, it's 10 violations for each of the 10 employees not wearing their hard hats. Wow. And now that $15,000 penalty has become a $150,000 penalty. So these are the kinds of things we're seeing during the Biden administration at OSHA that has really allowed OSHA to sharpen its teeth and making the minefield for employers all the more dangerous.
Well, not just the employers, but let's talk about the size of the employers. You know, there's a lot of small businesses that fall into this category. Of course, we're talking about protecting some of the bigger businesses that are out there, but how does this trickle down to affect our smaller producers?
Yeah, I mean, OSHA has jurisdiction over that workplace unless it is a family farm. Basically, OSHA is allowed to conduct its inspections and issue citations, and small employers are, there are things that OSHA can do. They have, calculations and formulas for how they determine penalties, and you can get penalty discounts for smaller employers. But by and large, we talked about that severe violator enforcement program, the things like this instance-by-instance citation philosophy. We see those doled out more for small employers than you do for larger employers. That severe violator enforcement program, more than half the employers that have been tripped up into that program over the couple of decades that's been with us have been small employers, and many of them have been in the grain industry, as we talked about, because really since 2008 OSHA has really had a spotlight on that industry.
The threat's out there, obviously, and it's probably going to get bigger when OSHA decides that it wants to bear down on any size business that it thinks that needs to. But I think we don't want to overlook the fact that the safety aspect is the most important thing. So if you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's on the farm, you shouldn't have to worry about that threat. So what are some of the things that you're trying to impose upon the people that you're talking to and express to them how important it is to try to stay away or out of sight from the OSHA demon, if you will?
Right. I mean, that's the great overlap, right? If you are complying with OSHA regulations. Hopefully that means you're providing a safe workplace. And that's the goal. Every employer I've met, every employer I've worked with shares that same interest that OSHA has. So what we're talking about today, for example, at this conference with OABA, is about understanding OSHA's expectations around things like working inside of grain bins with energized equipment, working inside of grain bins, whether there's energized equipment or not, the risk of engulfment, the risk of entanglement with some of this equipment. That's one of the responsibilities I feel like I have working with my clients, is to make sure they understand the regulatory framework. And if they're doing right by the regulatory requirements, hopefully that means that they're providing a safe workplace for their employees. And that's the goal that we all have.
Eric, we can talk about this for a long time, but it's very important that our farmer producers out there, regardless of the size of their business and what they do, they understand and they need to know how important it is to be safe on the farm 24/7. And some of the things that you're providing today are extremely important. I would call it a wake-up call in some cases. And then politically speaking, as you mentioned, some of that may not go away regardless of what happens in the political realm of things. Once they get up and they get started, it's kind of hard to pull the reins back on an organization like that. OSHA's a big dog, and it would be tough to slow them down, right?
That's right. And that is, I think wake-up call is a great characterization of what we're doing today. This issue around sweep augers really reached a head in about 2013. And we, NGFA, my law firm, and a couple of our clients worked really closely with OSHA to develop what we call the 10 sweep auger safety principles. Mm-hmm. And we got OSHA to buy into that, to that practice and to those particular elements of an effective sweep auger safety program, and memorialize that into basically the law. It was a guidance document that OSHA produced, and it was really effective. There was a great recognition by industry of that development with OSHA, because OSHA had basically said, hey, we don't see a safe way to do this. You're not allowed to be inside of a bin with a sweep auger. And that created a great challenge for employers in this industry. We developed these protocols, went into effect back in 2013, and employers did a great job of embracing that, adopting that. And we saw, as a result, a really great run of low numbers of these kinds of incidents, these engulfments and entanglements after that. It's been a while now. It's been about a decade, and we're starting to see those numbers creep back up. Engulfments and entanglements are striking again. OSHA is growing very concerned about it. And what I'm seeing out in the field is that when I see these incidents and I get involved in inspections and enforcement actions, that a lot of employers now have either forgotten about or never heard about those 10 sweep auger safety principles and the policy that OSHA embraced back in 2013. So that was the idea we had to talk about that today, was as a reminder and a wake-up call to industry that you are allowed to work inside of a grain bin with an energized sweep auger, but it has to be within this framework. And if we can revitalize that and renew understanding of that, it's going to result in better compliance, but also better safety. So that's what we're doing here today.
We talked with Chris Henney, President and CEO of the Ohio Agribusiness Association, about the speakers that they bring to an event like this, and having a knowledgeable person, somebody who knows both sides of the fence. Eric Conn, you've just been enlightening our audience. And if people want more information about what you do you have a website they can go to?
Yeah, sure thing. We're the law firm is Conn, Maciel, Carey. Our website is connmaciel.com. CONN, M as in Mary, ACIEL. We've got a great blog, the OSHA Defense Report blog. My mother says the articles are extremely interesting, and she's not biased at all. So check that out. And we also put on a webinar series this year, the 2023 OSHA webinar series at Conn, Maciel, Carey. Free monthly programs where we get into some some hot topic developing OSHA programs like the Severe Violator Enforcement Program or specific regulatory requirements like working with powered industrial trucks. So I encourage you to check it out, sign up for those. And, if you can't tell, I'm a huge OSHA nerd. I love talking about this stuff and hearing about employers' experiences out in the field with OSHA. So please reach out if you've got questions or just want to talk about your experiences with OSHA.
And I'm sure they'll have a link at the Ohio Agribusiness Association website as well. Eric Conn has been our guest. Eric, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we'll be back with more in Ohio Country Today right after this.